I'm here this afternoon with Greg Canty from Fuzion Communications. Greg, I know our paths have crossed many, many times over the years, over different things, and we're doing lots of work together on all creative things. But I thought it would be a lovely idea just to take a moment and just chat about our experiences in all things gluten-free, because I think we both have family members that are celiac, and it would be just nice to hear your story and just share similarities and differences in our experiences. So I thought we might just have a wee chat, if that's all right with you.
Yeah, delighted to. Thank you, Denise.
So tell me then, so I know our story is my dad is diagnosed as celiac, and is the whole reason why we're here in Delicious, with him being diagnosed as an adult in his late 50s. So the bakery's up and running 16 years now. But the whole reason for it was Dad's diagnosis and that quest for really good quality, great tasting baked goods, which were non-existent at the time. So tell me then, it's not yourself, it's your daughter, I believe, is it? That's
Yeah,
gluten-free?
Ellen, and she's 30 now.
Okay.
So, like obviously an adult taking responsibility for her own food and her own shopping and all that kind of thing. But obviously that wasn't always the case.
What age was she when she was diagnosed, Greg?
I would say, no,
That's
as I
her
was
mum.
saying to you earlier, if that was her mother, she'd know the exact date and date probably. I reckon in her late teens.
Oh, okay.
And before that, she would have had ongoing stomach problems
Okay.
and reactions to different things. And you know
Okay.
yourself, never knowing fully what that was down to. But when it was eventually diagnosed, I suppose that was a good day, and that, there was a bit of clarity that we had
Yes.
around all of that.
Yeah.
And for her, I would say at the time it was probably a bad day,
Yeah.
because that made her different to the
Yes.
rest of us.
Yes.
And, at that age, as a teenager, anything that makes you different is a big deal.
Yeah. Yeah. I know. Yeah. My niece actually recently was a bit unwell, and with Dad being celiac, I said to her, "Have you been tested for celiac? Maybe you're celiac." And her face just, oh my God, she froze. She was like, "Oh, no, 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 that's not what I wanted." And I said, "Look, it's no big deal." And she was like, "Oh, no, no, no." And it's exactly that. It's really the age for trying to fit in, isn't it? People just don't want to be different when they're a teen. It's probably the worst age to be diagnosed. Actually, if you're diagnosed as a baby, no different. And if you're as an adult, in your 30s, whatever, fine, you just have to handle it. But as a teen, yeah, it's a bit difficult, isn't it?
Yeah. And it's something for everyone to bear in mind suddenly.
Yeah. Yeah.
When there's a function or a dinner with family, or you're heading to a restaurant or whatever,
Yeah.
in a way, it's not just her thing to think about, it's everyone's.
Yeah. Yeah.
So if we do have a gathering at the house, or, we all need to think about that now.
Yeah.
And in a way, that becomes an easy thing. And suddenly when you're thinking, oh no, Ellen's coming, what'll we have for dinner, and what'll we have for dessert, and what'll we have for a starter? Or even at this stage, what'll she have to drink?
Yeah. Yeah.
When you actually kind of look into it, and with the choice of things that are available, it's not the big deal, I think, that it used to be. It's not as restrictive as it used to be.
Yeah, no, I think definitely it has gotten much easier. I certainly know that when we set up the bakery, it was so, like, we were home bakers. Mum's a great home baker, so Dad was lucky. He was spoiled in that we were able to bake at home. But in terms of goods that you would buy on the supermarket shelf, it was really slim pickings, and it was just on the back of that we were baking so much for him at home that we kind of thought, well, what about everybody else? Because this is really quite a difficult nut to crack. And okay, we're fine because we can bake at home, but what about the rest of the people that are being diagnosed? But there was really very little out there. And actually, going further back, my very first customer was a very nice lady. So she probably, I suppose she's in her 80s now, or late 70s. And she said to me that when she was diagnosed as a young girl, so we'll say 60 odd years ago, that the bread that they used to buy came from the UK. It was available in the pharmacy, and it was sold in a tin, like a tin of beans. Can you imagine that? You had to shake it out. And it was like, a little roundy thing, and that was it. And she said there was nothing else. That was it. So we are very lucky now in the choice, because there's such an amount of product available now, isn't there?
Yeah, and I think in those early days, as well as looking different, it
Yeah,
certainly tasted different.
yeah, yeah,
And
yeah,
there was a big dose of punishment, I think, at that stage.
yeah.
Ellen, I would say, was was forced to eat an awful lot of awful crap.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Yeah, but now it's nearly the other way because, you know, we're conscious of it now. We know about it. So, for example, if we do have a family dinner, we will always think of her when we're buying in the bits and pieces for
yeah,
the function or the event or whatever.
yeah,
And we'll make sure we have stuff for her. And regularly she'll be saying, "This is great, Dad. Well, taste this. It's exactly
yeah.
the same." Nearly to the point where you're thinking, "Gee, because we all should have got that, do you know?"
Yes, yeah,
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 yeah.
yeah.
Because it's
Where
not.
we what we actually do with the various households, we just all cook and bake gluten free anyway. So we've just all gotten into it, I suppose, because we were all living at home when Dad was diagnosed. We just all got into it, so we've just continued. So everybody cooks and bakes gluten free anyway. So regardless of whose doorstep he turns up on, he'll be fine. Everything is, the gravies are gluten free, the stuff is gluten free, the bread, the flour. It's just easier. And like you, I know my husband Derek makes pancakes on a Sunday morning for me, and they're far superior in the gluten-free fashion because they're actually much lighter, and they're a much nicer product, a much nicer finished product or item than if you were making them with regular wheat flour, which tends to be kind of heavier and a bit stodgy and a bit staged. So it's, as you say, it's a nicer choice all around.
Yeah, and I think the biggest problem does occur around baked goods, though, doesn't it? With your
Yeah,
breads
yeah,
and your cakes. I think general foods and stuff, maybe with gravy and stuff, you might get stuck. But for the most part, it's
yeah.
relatively easy to have the same thing for everyone.
Yes,
But I do think with cakes and treats, that's
in
when you
particular.
do get into a little bit of trouble or difficulty.
Yes, yeah. It is easier in cooking because I suppose you're just looking at sauces or gravies, and all you need to do is say, oh, we're going to thicken this with cornstarch or potato flour or arrowroot instead of thickening it with with wheat flour. So that's relatively easy. But the challenge is, yeah, as you say, certainly on the dessert menu, I've been to restaurants with Dad. I feel so sorry for him, where the starters, there's nothing, and they say, oh, fruit salad, and he plows through the fruit salad, then he's okay with the main course, and then it comes to dessert, and they've forgotten that they've already plied him with the fruit salad, and so they go up around and they say fruit salad. And he's like, well, actually, I just had that. Thank you so much. I've had my 5 a day. And they have nothing. And it's like, I feel at this stage, I suppose it's different 20 years ago when people didn't know, and there was that big education piece, and we can talk about that in a minute. But nowadays, there's no excuse, for not having a gluten-free option. It's actually easier than dairy-free and soya-free and all the other free-froms that can be asked. Gluten-free is really straightforward. So, and I just hate to see where it's that a restaurant or a chef just doesn't really have that level of interest or that level of education and knowledge, because I suppose you do need to be interested for the baked goods, like you're saying. So if you're making, I don't know, an apple tart as a restaurant or a hotel or whatever, or even a household, like the gluten-free pastry is a nightmare. And trying to do that is just very difficult. And ironically, that's where our baking mixes have come from as well. So we baked obviously for years, but then during COVID, we were doing home baking at home for people at home. So we do home baking mixes. So people who don't want to bake from scratch will want to bake, but know that it's all a bit challenging and a bit complicated. So we do like baking mixes. So a scone mix, a muffin mix, or whatever, a brownie mix. But we also have those launched for the trade side, because there are some restaurants and cafes and all the rest that want to do their bit to look after the people that are free from, but don't necessarily have someone with the time or the wherewithal to spend trying to develop a really nice pastry. And we found that that's really gotten traction as well on the commercial side of the business. for people who are trying to look after their people's intolerances and diseases.
And what I find with Ellen, if we're going out to eat and you're trying to pick your restaurants, and of course we all look at the menu, don't we? And we're glancing through it from A to Z, and I'm always glancing across at her, thinking she's nearly looking, what can I eat on this damn thing?
Yeah.
And then of course she's making an assumption that when they say it's gluten free, that it really is, because she's very sensitive, and I know. If there's any bit of, I might be using the wrong language now, if there's any bit of cross-contamination between the production area, she'll trip immediately. I remember one Italian experience we had, and if you can imagine, you're away for a week, which isn't a huge amount of time, and you're in Italy and you're looking at these wonderful restaurants. So number one, you have the language barrier. And two, eventually when you do communicate that, we have someone here that's that requires gluten-free, and they're telling you they comprehend it.
Yeah.
And half an hour after leaving the restaurant, she's buckled, and awful pain and having to get out of the car and all that kind of thing. So would you think the Irish eating out experience compared to maybe some of your overseas experiences, are they quite different, do you think?
Quite different, and maybe they are, and that's obviously Ellen is very sensitive. God love her. That's dreadful that you meet, and it can really spoil a holiday.
Oh, that was a day written off. She's in bits and pain and everything else for the day.
To head to bed. Yeah.
And probably,
I do think there's a carelessness sometimes with when you're eating out, in that they can say, oh yeah, gluten free, and whether if it's careless or not. Now, and I'm not saying it happens in Ireland, but they don't necessarily understand the implications of it. They get it with things like peanuts, but it goes, oh well, because you could die. But I think they feel sometimes with gluten free, you'll be fine, you'll be grand, and it's not the case. But I suppose you always have the language barrier. We're lucky Dad travels with us quite a bit, and I speak a few languages, so I'm always like a lunatic out there doing it. And I've actually given him, and I know the Coeliac Society do the same thing, but for when he was traveling with my sister, like laminated cards, and he'd hand them over. Hello, I'm a celiac. Please be nice to me, and make sure you don't give me any gluten. And I don't want flour, and I don't want, in case they didn't know what gluten was, So I can't have flour, but I'm okay with potatoes, because sometimes they would say, oh, no potatoes. So that kind of thing happened. But I suppose, as you're saying now, the fact that there's so much more occurrence and awareness around it is actually a really good thing.
Oh, absolutely. And going back to that holiday analogy or whatever, like I know Ellen, if you go into a place and they say they have gluten-free options, she's nearly looking at everything in the restaurant just to think, is it a place that maintains its standards generally? Yes. So if they say they're going to, if the place is clean, you might think if they say they have a gluten-free option, you can say they probably do know how to do that properly.
Yeah.
And in your group, 6 people, 8 people or whatever, there's a good chance you have one person that requires gluten-free. And just at a very practical level, if you can do that properly, well, you get the business for all 8 people. Because Ellen will tell us fairly quickly that I know this won't be gluten-free. Can we just go on somewhere else or whatever? And might be a bit embarrassing or a bit frustrating or a bit awkward. Before you know, the last thing you want is her buckled over,
Yeah, of course. But maybe in a way in Ireland, we're better placed to actually look after our celiacs, because Ireland has the highest number of celiacs in Europe.
Yeah, what's that done to? Or have we any idea?
Oh, there's all kinds of mad theories. I've heard theories over the years about the Vikings and the famine. But whatever theory you buy into, it boils down to that we have the highest number of celiacs per capita, and actually Italy is the second behind us.
Wow.
So they have the second highest, and then bizarrely Israel's very high as well. But we'd be the 2 highest in Europe. But and I must say, certainly when I set up the bakery, like there was a learning curve for, you were trying to sell something that very few people needed, and that a lot of shops and restaurants were, why would we need this? Why would we bother with this? And I do think that the fact that there are now so many people that follow a gluten-free diet as a lifestyle choice, I think that's fabulous, because it really opens up the market, but really increases awareness. And we would have people phoning saying, oh, I get your coffee cake from such and such place and I love it. But all those lifestyle people are coming in now and they're buying them up and I can't get them, And I always say, that's fabulous. Isn't that amazing? I'm delighted, and they're complaining, saying, this is ridiculous. I want to be able to get it. I am the celiac here, and I understand the frustration. But for us, it just means that it's more commonplace, and so therefore, more places are obliged to be able to cater for it, but are better skilled at catering for it, I think.
Yeah. And just following on from that, I think as Ellen has got older, and I'm not sure what your dad is like, whether he does cooking or what himself, she's taken a lot more responsibility as time has gone on.
Okay.
So I would say now she eats very well. She's very conscious of all of her food. Now maybe it's a stage of life thing as well, I'm not quite sure. But now they're enjoying their own pizzas, herself and Mark.
Yeah.
And Mark can eat anything.
Yeah.
And he certainly isn't losing out by eating the foods that she's cooking. I absolutely know that.
So he's on a gluten-free diet?
I think pretty much, yeah. And even down to things like pizzas, they make their own pizzas. And obviously, I don't even know where they get bases and everything, but...
hopefully from us.
yeah, totally. But hopefully. She's not losing out anyway, for sure,
Yeah.
And maybe it's more education on everyone else's side, so that, the likes of your dad or Ellen don't feel like they're losing out or different, and getting the token dish when they come for dinner.
Yeah. I must say, when I'm even buying things like sausages, I always buy the gluten-free ones as against the regular ones. And anyone who comes to the house, if they're having sausages, Derek's family are obsessed with sausages, and they always get the gluten-free version rather than the regular ones,
Yeah, just in case.
Just in case, yeah. But because Derek's sister is gluten-free as well, so it's just easier, But Dad is spoiled. He doesn't cook at all or bake, so Mum does everything for him. So he's very lucky. She kind of polices him, because unlike Ellen, my dad actually doesn't have that many symptoms. He does get a bit cranky. But he doesn't think he does, but it does impact his mood. And actually, I have another celiac friend, and she'll always say, no, I'm absolutely fine. And then she's dreadful, because she would go to restaurants and she'll just eat. Like, she wouldn't even tell anyone she's celiac or look at the gluten-free options. She'll just drive on with the regular menu. And I'm absolutely murdering her, saying, you got to look after yourself, because that is the end result. You will end up with stomach cancer if you don't take care of it. And then she'll kind of, okay. And she'll go and she'll get, the gluten-free option. But she gets very cantankerous, like her head is on back to front, and that she doesn't realize she's been cranky. But there was one time, poor Dad, he, you can get gluten-free Jaffa cakes, which he quite likes. And the packaging is very similar to the regular ones. And now he has his own cupboard at home and all his stuff is, in his spot. But for whatever reason, anyway, he ended up absolutely pigging out on a packet of regular Jaffa cakes, and everybody was teasing him, that he'd fallen off the wagon and here he was eating all this gluten. And he, God love him, you could see he was off form, he was, and Mum would certainly tell you that he was very cranky, even though he would deny it to the last. But I do think as well, when you're celiac and you're on the diet, so you're being correct about it, and you do have some gluten, I do think you have an exaggerated reaction to it. I see that sometimes with customers that come here, so that if they're being really good and they're following their gluten-free diet, and then something happens for some whatever reason, they actually have a bigger reaction to it than they might have had before they were diagnosed. And I think it's just their body becomes used to not having the gluten. Whereas before it's taking the gluten and trying to process it, albeit badly.
Yeah.
And was Ellen, when you were saying, I won't pin you down to years now, as to when exactly she was diagnosed, but she was obviously young. And was she very unwell in the run up to it when you didn't know what it was?
Yeah, she would have been sickly.
Yeah.
in an ongoing way.
Yeah.
And you know that there's always something wrong with me. And that nearly spills onto the other people. Oh, for God's sake, what's wrong with you now?
Yeah. Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know, in
Yeah.
particular when they're not exactly
Yeah.
pinpointing what's wrong, and you can
Yeah.
go, oh, for God's sake.
What now? Yeah. Yeah. You're imagining it.
Yeah, a little bit of that, you know, and like at that age, there's so many things going on with young people anyway. But with clarity, I think it was an awful lot better. The other thing I think that's important as well is that I think how we view gluten-free has changed as well. I think when you were buying those products, you know this better than anyone with your dad, it was nearly like, oh, that's the bread for sick people, or that's the option.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's a conversation I have with a good buddy of mine, a neighbour of yours, Tommy Doyle, in the Kinsale Bay Food Company, and all of their produce is gluten-free.
Yeah.
And how much do you turn the volume up or the volume down on the fact that it is gluten-free?
Yeah. Yeah.
And like in his case, I'd say most of the people eating his produce are just buying it because it's good food, not that it's gluten-free. And even when I think of it now and I'm trying to imagine the packaging, I don't think there's a big siren going off saying, I'm gluten-free, eat me.
Yeah.
But how do you feel about that?
Yeah, it's a very interesting one actually. And certainly I know at the start when we were setting up the packaging, so a lot of the products were sold through the pharmacy. Or we're on kind of programs where you got your products through the pharmacy. And the breads were all long life packaging. I know I know there are still some on the market, but the packaging that you could send them to the moon and back and they'd still be fresh when they come down. So there was a lot of that, and there was very little kind of fresher, baked kind of nice items. And the packaging was all a bit grim. Everything was a bit medicinal, and you were eating it because you had to eat it. Certainly no one would choose to eat it, not in the fish. And but with that kind of how much do you talk about gluten-free or not gluten-free, we found at the start we were out there really pushing that it was gluten-free, but and that suited me because in my mind we were looking after the free from people, and if there was anyone else eating or buying, then great, that's a bonus. And as well, we like say for our scones or breads, we can never compete with Pat the Baker because we're gluten free. We'll always be so much more expensive. I was talking to another cake company recently, and they were complaining about the price of flour, and I just started laughing because for me it was so cheap. And I know with Ukraine, wheat flour has gone through the roof relative to where it was, but we were paying like 10 times that price, for our flour, for what flours we buy. And I laughed, I was saying, oh, you need to join the gluten-free world, and then you'll know what it's all about. But so what I was trying to say was we'll never compare with regular products because say a regular scone might be 50p, will be €1, and there's no two ways about it because the ingredients are so expensive. But we did a lot of work with Board Bia, because I kind of wanted to get the pitch or the presentation of our labeling and what we were trying to sell, the story we were trying to get across to people. And I didn't want it to appear as grim and medicinal and all this kind of thing. And so it was actually very funny. There's this guy that does the work with Board Bia. He does these focus groups. And so he goes off, and actually was in the UK because we were trying to get into the UK market at the time. So he goes off and he gets a group of people in Birmingham and a group of people in London, and he shows all the products. You know how it goes, but show the products to all these different people and say what do you think of this and what do you think it looks and what to remind you of when you taste it and all this. So we were really excited because we'd never done anything like this, and in particular it was getting us outside of Ireland. And so I was so excited going off for my meeting with this guy in Board Bia. And I said, what's the story? And I said, but break it gently to me now if it's bad news. And he said, well, have you ever been to a party and there's that girl lurking at the back of the room and she's wearing the brown dress? Because our colours were kind of brown and maroon at the time. And I said, am I the girl in the brown dress? And he said, you're the girl in the brown dress. And I said, how am I wearing the brown dress. And I was like, oh, Jesus, you know. And actually, I did own a brown dress at the time, and I went home and I gave it to Charlie straight away. That was the end of the brown dress phase. But he said, yeah, you know, you're there. You're there and people see you're there. Nobody really wants to give you too much attention. Yeah, oh, but you have to be there. And I was like, oh my Lord. So they did a whole project and it was very interesting. But they kind of worked a lot on the story of Dad and that I was baking for Dad. And then because I'm a bit old fashioned, I think they kind of put this 1950s kind of a retro spin on everything. And as well, because home baking, they felt that that was kind of, you know, the whole home baking kind of thing, 1950s. I'm sure it's completely on PC now, but that was kind of the story they played up. But the whole thing was they made the packaging more fun, not so quirky that it was weird, but just a bit more playful. And it was, I think, it was certainly our first step away from this very medicinal kind of, you know, you have to have it product to a more you can have it if you want it, and you don't even have to be celiac. So trying to encompass more people, and then they kind of changed the palette of colors to more friendly and pastels, and just the whole thing became, I suppose, more accessible and friendlier. And we were, I suppose, we were maybe one of the first people to do that, and then you saw afterwards other people coming to the same conclusion. And where we are now, you see beautiful packaging on shelf.
Yeah,
you know.
I think in your case, more than just the beautiful packaging, you were determined not to create products that your dad would eat, but to create products and experiences that he felt he was having a treat and he wasn't losing out at all.
Yeah.
And going back to what you were saying about the price of flour, and you know, you were saying scones, for example, become very expensive. But if, in the general scheme of things, with a few tweaks in your buying, and you know, you're definitely going to pay a few bob extra for some of the gluten-free options. But in the overall diet, with that careful mix of foods, it doesn't need to have a big impact on your on the cost of what you're feeding the family.
Yeah.
And at the same time, you're still giving everyone the treats that they like, and your dad or Ellen isn't missing out, really. You know what I mean? And I think that's the most important thing. I think the biggest thing with me when it comes to gluten-free is them feeling different, feeling that every time they go to eat something that they're having something inferior, or they're losing out, or they don't have a choice.
Yeah.
And thankfully, as time has gone on between, you know, your hard work and I think more knowledge and information and more care in restaurants and everything else, that that problem is being solved, you know, and
thankfully, isn't it? Thankfully,
it's not the problem that it was
for the Ellens and the dads of the world, because there's nothing worse than feeling that you're the odd one out. And oftentimes, actually, you know, people would come to us here looking for maybe a small birthday cake or two cupcakes for their son who's going to be at a party and has nothing for himself. And actually, and because the assumption still can be that the products may taste inferior because you're taking out gluten. And then oftentimes they would actually, rather than taking 2 cupcakes, would buy a dozen cupcakes for all the kids. And then when they see the kids absolutely devouring everything, you know, there's a great realization that actually, you know what, this is gluten-free. We're taking care of everyone that needs to be free from. And that it's also actually, you know what, it delivers on taste. And that's the big thing for us, you know.
Yeah, and the other big thing that I'd like to say, and it's kind of a weird one, really. It's easy when we are having a gathering or you're cooking your meals for us to forget about getting that little dessert that Ellen can have as well.
Yeah.
And if you do forget, and of course we do from time to time, that's okay. That's all right, Dad. Do you have any ice cream or whatever? That's cool. But when you do think of them, when you do think of her or your dad, it means the world to them. It absolutely means the world to them. So in a very roundabout way, it's probably not the subject matter of our podcast, but it does give you an opportunity to say, listen, I wanted you to have a nice time today, and I wanted you not to feel any different. I wanted you to feel special. So I went out of my way to make sure that I had something for you.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
that's in a roundabout ways. I love you, so
Oh,
it
that's
gives us
lovely.
those little opportunities, Denise.
Oh, that's nice. That's nice. Oh, well, maybe that's a really nice note to finish things on. Anyway, Greg, that's really lovely.
Yeah,
And I'm sure Ellen feels very loved that you make lots of effort for her when she's coming around. But and I hope she cooks lots of gluten-free meals for you as well. That she does some of the entertaining rather than you always having to be slaving away at the stove.
absolutely. And I'm waiting for that invite. I've been waiting for a while, Denise.
I know, yeah, that's it. We'll have to get you down here. A cookery class now will be the next thing we'll get you started. Not the one with 20 small children now. I maybe an adult one might be a bit better, but a
I
glass of
wouldn't.
wine perhaps.
I wouldn't be able at this stage.
Oh
Thank
yeah,
you so much.
yeah. Thanks a million, Greg. Lovely
Yeah,
chatting with
thank
you.
you. Take it easy.